American West. Perhaps no other phrase has inspired more longing, vision, and hope, awakened more spirit of adventure and discovery, or motivated more human migration. The quest for new beginnings, the promise of unseen territory and uncompromised lands, the challenge of blazing new trails to the place that must exist, just beyond the sunset. Thus, the American West is more than a geographical fact. It is a spirit, a concept, a country of the mind, and it holds an intrinsic key to our national character. More than a place, the West is many places within a realm where boundaries seem an illusion and time stretches beyond human memory. This is where, by tradition, the American West begins, the continent's greatest river, the Mississippi. It courses through the heartland of the nation, 2,348 miles from Little Lake Itasca in northwestern Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico. With its several thousand tributaries, the Mississippi drains 1/8 of the continent, waters from 30 states, from some of the richest agricultural land the world has ever known. Yet it is not the great power of the Mississippi, nor the wealth that it brings to the marketplace, that give it unique stature among the great rivers of the world. It is rather the fascinating story of a people whose way of life and culture are inextricably linked to this great waterway. The Mississippi is both a symbol and a crossroads. To westward-looking adventurers of a young nation, on the eastern bank stood the edge of a rapidly growing new world. On the western bank, the beginning of the wilderness. For the French explorer La Salle, the Mississippi was a high road to empire. In the autumn of 1681, La Salle paddled the length of the Mississippi, naming the vast domain Louisiana in honor of the French king Louis XIV. For an 18th century trapper and fur trader, the river was a pathway to the riches of the Northwest Territory. For a 19th century homesteader moving west, the Mississippi was the gateway to new beginnings. The soul of the southern part of the Mississippi is found in New Orleans, especially in the 100 blocks of the old city that spread out from the riverside buildings bordering Jackson Square in the French Quarter. French and Spanish, Creole and African. At one time, a half-dozen cultures came together here in the French Quarter. Through the years, this is a city that has never forgotten how to eat and drink well, has always been ready to throw a party, and remembers the way to play the music that was born here next to the Mississippi. From both banks of the river north of New Orleans spreads the rich farmland of the South, the setting for another way of life, and, it would seem, a different age. Some of the great plantation houses still stand, remnants of the day when cotton was king, hoop skirts were the fashion, and gentlemen fought duels of honor. Nottaway Plantation at White Castle, near Baton Rouge, Louisiana, claims title to the largest surviving plantation in the South. The main house alone has 64 rooms. The cotton and sugar fortunes, as well as the gracious lifestyle of the plantation owners, was of course built upon a foundation of slave labor. That foundation crumbled in the war that tore our nation in half. Long before the United States acquired the lands of the Mississippi from the French through the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, this river was recognized as the vital artery into America's heartland. Thus, here at Vicksburg in 1863 was fought the battle that gave the North control of the Mississippi. Vicksburg's National Military Cemetery memorializes the place where the Confederacy lost one of the most crucial battles of the Civil War, and where thousands in uniforms of both blue and gray lost their lives. "60 miles north of Vicksburg is Natchez, which survived the Civil War virtually intact. Consequently, this city has the Southland's greatest concentration of grand antebellum homes, most dating from the era when this was Dixie's center of wealth. "630 miles upriver in Missouri is a quaint neighborhood that almost every American will recognize, for the residents are old friends from our childhood. Hannibal, hometown of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. The creator of the adventures of Tom and Huck, Samuel Clemens, took his pen name, Mark Twain, directly from his life as a pilot on the Mississippi River steamboats. Mark Twain was riverboat slang for 2 fathoms deep, safe water, just deep enough to be navigated.
Piloting on the Mississippi River was not work for me. It was play. Delightful play, vigorous play, adventurous play, and I loved it. A steamboat is as beautiful as a wedding cake, but without the complications.
Today, there are only 2 such vessels left on the river, the Delta Queen and the Mississippi Queen. But from the mid-19th century until the Great Depression, glamorous boats like them plied the river, carrying a colorful cast of passengers: Southern belles, cotton kings, gun-toting gamblers, sugar barons, and cure-all salesmen. Indeed, these waters have always seemed to nurture a special kind of human legend. Perhaps it's because the shifting sandbars and channels, the floodwaters, and the sheer force of powerful currents are a constant challenge to human ingenuity, and a continuing reminder that the final word here comes from only one source: Old Man River. About 10,000 years ago, the Great Lakes emptied into the Gulf of Mexico via the Mississippi. But when the glaciers melted, the lakes began to fill the enormous hollows the retreating glaciers had left behind. Great is the appropriate name for these lakes, our planet's largest expanse of fresh water. In fact, about 1/5 of all the fresh surface water in the world is right here. The largest is Lake Superior, which alone covers 32,000 square miles, an area about the size of Maine. The others, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, Lake Michigan, and Lake Ontario, are no less impressive. Each lake is large enough to qualify as an inland sea, and together their shorelines, shared by the United States and Canada, stretch an incredible 9,400 miles. It was westward that the explorers and pioneers moved along these expansive inland seas, first by canoe, then by skiff, sloop, and schooner, finally by steamer. Many a luckless captain lost his ship in the furious storms that can make the lakes a mariner's nightmare. Some of the wrecks can still be seen from the surface. These ghostly remnants have rested on the bottom for more than a century. Most of the lighthouses that once guided storm-tossed ships without the aid of electricity are now fully automated. The lighthouses remain, stately, trustworthy sentinels of the Great Lakes shoreline. The lakes are one of the continent's busiest routes for waterborne commerce. Chicago is just one of the many dynamic cities that line its shores. Offshore, intriguing life forms have developed on the innumerable islands of the Great Lakes. Most of these islands are uninhabited. Others, such as Mackinac in the straits between Lake Huron and Lake Michigan, have long been occupied by man. The island's charm is preserved by the Mackinac Island State Park Commission. Automobiles are banned, giving Mackinac a unique feature. The road that circles the island is the only state highway in the nation to prohibit motorized traffic. At Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore in northern Michigan, the cliffs, carved by waves, rain, and ice, soar as high as 200 feet above Lake Superior in layers of brilliant color. And at the jutting monolith called Miner's Castle, the shore has been chiseled into what look like the parapets of a castle, a filigreed structure as high as a 9-story building. To the south, on Lake Michigan, lies one of America's biggest sand piles, Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. The sand is constantly on the march before the commanding winds. Always moving, reshaping, changing, the dunes steal relentlessly inland 2 feet a year, a seeming fantasy in a land probably best known for its lakes and forests. To the west of Lake Michigan was Paul Bunyan country, the site of the mythical lumber camps where Paul and his crew of peerless loggers performed their greatest exploits. After they had logged off the trees in the Great Lakes region, Paul headed west. At least that's how legend has it. Even Paul Bunyan must have found the trip west a challenge, because along the way, even the most rugged frontiersman had his mettle tested by places such as this. Hell with the fires burned out. That's how General Alfred Sully described this region in South Dakota, after he'd been sent there in the 1860s. Before that, in 1823, the Badlands had very nearly destroyed mountain man Jedediah Smith and his band of trappers en route to the Black Hills. After falling ill from contaminated river water, the trappers buried 2 members of their party in sand up to their necks to preserve body moisture. The men did survive. Even the Native American tribes, the Dakotas, avoided this place. They named it Makoshika, the Badlands. And the Badlands it has remained. This was once the floor of an ancient inland sea. Then it was uplifted, tilted, and drained by the same titanic forces that raised the Rocky Mountains some 65 million years ago. These water-carved, gutted canyons and wind-scoured mesas are a classic study in erosion, and they continue to change. Each downpour alters the shape of the jagged buttes and scalloped ridges of Badlands National Park. It is one of the world's most rapidly dissolving landscapes. Eventually, the fluted spires will fall, the slashing ravines and naked scarps will vanish, and all of this will be a vast plain. But that will take a few million years. Present-day visitors are often surprised that fossil remains of alligators and giant sea turtles can be found in this parched landscape. Saber-toothed cats and other long-extinct creatures also roamed here many years ago. Today, another animal out of America's past roams the Badlands. Bison, up to 700 head. Barely that many were left on the entire continent at the turn of the century, after the railroads, the hide hunters, and Buffalo Bill had had their way. Rather than a region to be shunned, this bizarre landscape hosts thousands of visitors each year. Many find that they agree with Theodore Roosevelt, who once had a ranch in the North Dakota Badlands. Said Teddy,
"It has a curious, fantastic beauty of its own."
And renowned architect Frank Lloyd Wright saw spirituality in the sculpted pyramids, knobs, and pinnacles of the Badlands. In his words,
"Here for once comes complete release from materiality. Communion with what man often calls God is inevitable in this place."
Yet the Badlands have also been the setting for tragedy. The winter of 1890. Chief Bigfoot and 152 of his followers have been massacred by the U.S. Army at Wounded Knee. The Sioux, several thousand strong, come from the Pine Ridge Reservation to the Badlands. They gather here atop Stronghold Table to perform the Ghost Dance. It is their final, desperate attempt to evoke the Great Spirit to restore land that has been taken from them. Their supplication is in vain. Chief Red Cloud speaks, for a time that is passing, for a cause that is lost.
Riches would do us no good. We could not take them with us to the other world. We do not want riches. We want peace and love. I never want to leave this country. All my relatives are lying here in the ground. And when I fall to pieces, I am going to fall here.
Northwest, across the Wyoming border, the Sioux tell a story with a happier ending. one of the many legends about a great stone tower. Three maidens, the story goes, were gathering flowers when they were attacked by bears. To escape, they climbed upon a boulder. Seeing their distress, the gods made the rock grow higher. As the bears tried to climb it, the rock continued to rise until, at last, the bears fell and were killed. But on the sides of that rock, you can still see the deep scratches their claws left behind. Scientific speculation is less romantic. Most geologists believe that the monolith is the throat of an old volcano, left standing after the softer rock surrounding it was stripped away by wind, water, and frost. In the folklore of some neighboring tribes, an evil spirit dwells on the summit. When the summer storm clouds gather, the spirit beats a drum, creating thunder, and the surrounding land trembles in fear. Bad God's Tower was how early white explorers interpreted the Sioux name for Devil's Tower. Today, its imposing mass continues to be a mystical setting for legend and myth. Steven Spielberg, director of the popular science fiction movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, chose Devil's Tower when he needed a landing site for beings from another world. The military commander of the government party that surveyed it in 1875 stated flatly, "The summit is inaccessible to anything without wings." 18 years later, he would be proved wrong by cowboy William Rogers and his sidekick Willard Ripley. On the 4th of July, 1893, the pair celebrated Independence Day by scaling Devil's Tower. They used a 350-foot ladder, a series of hardwood pegs driven into crevices in the rock wall. Today, some 2,000 mountaineers climb the spectacular 865-foot pillar of columns each year. Though the average climb takes about 3 to 4 hours, the record time is 18 minutes. An acre and a half of grasses and shrubs crown the fairly flat top of the tower. Surprisingly, it is populated by a colony of mice and chipmunks. But what inspired these animals, or their ancestors, to climb to such a place remains a mystery. In 1906, this nature-created skyscraper was designated Devil's Tower National Monument, the first of our country's national monuments. Only the prairie dogs remain unimpressed. These barking ground squirrels live in a bustling colony near the base of Devil's Tower. Highly sociable and jealously territorial, they perform sentry duty at the entrances to their subterranean community, giving a warning bark whenever intruders threaten. No one is certain how large this underground dog town is. Some prairie dog habitats are estimated to cover hundreds of acres, with populations numbering in the thousands. Perhaps the most extensive wildlife population in all of North America lies along the spine of the Rocky Mountains, where two ranges of the Northern Rockies slice south through Canada into northern Montana. Most of the mammals native to the United States, 57 different species, have found a home here. This magnificent animal habitat has been set aside as protected parkland on both sides of the border. In Montana, it is called Glacier National Park. In the Canadian province of Alberta, it is named Waterton Lakes National Park. In 1932, the neighboring nations dedicated the two parks as the world's first international peace park. Wildlife is only one of the attractions of this region of majestic mountains, forested valleys, and flower-laden alpine gardens. The Going to the Sun Road, an east-west highway that traverses the park, is one of the world's great scenic routes. Ice Age glaciers honed these sheer jutting peaks, chiseled the valleys, and dug out hollows for more than 200 lakes. That process continues even today. Some 50 glaciers are still on the move in the high country, slowly grinding and sculpting this mountain wilderness. Each glacier feeds a network of glistening streams that cascade into deep, cold mountain lakes. The park straddles the Continental Divide, and from a single mountain, Triple Divide Peak, water flows in 3 different directions. Water originating here either flows west to the Columbia River, northeast to the Arctic Ocean, or southeast into tributaries of the Mississippi. Some of the most spectacular alpine scenery in the United States lies within the park boundaries. And although the highway presents a continuously changing panorama, this is walking and hiking country. Some 700 miles of trails have been built into the wilderness, and they reach virtually every section of the park. The trails range in difficulty from short, self-guided nature walks to mountain paths that challenge even the most dedicated backpacker. And the stunning spectacle of knife-edge ridges, glistening snowfields, and bright mountain lakes is usually enough to lure even the most sedentary travelers, especially in midsummer when the valley meadows are filled with brilliant displays of wildflowers. Winter comes early in the northern Rockies. By October, the first snows are blowing across the Montana high country. The main highway is closed. The bears are hibernating. Many of the birds have headed south. And the peaks stand isolated and pristine. A very special kind of winter grandeur settles over these mountains. Even in the frigid winter, there is one part of the Rocky Mountain landscape that is always at the boiling point. It is an eerie display. Mountains belch forth steam. Fountains of scalding vapor erupt without warning. The very earth churns itself into a muddy froth. This rolling inferno of mud, water, and steam convinced one early explorer to exclaim, "Hell must be in the vicinity." But Yellowstone National Park, more than 2 million acres extending into 3 states, is more aptly called a natural paradise. Its glacier-carved valleys and cascading rivers, its pristine wildlife, bear, elk, eagle, and bison. The incomparable diversity of its thermal peculiarities make Yellowstone one of the nation's finest examples of undisturbed wilderness. a living snapshot of the American continent before the age of man. Yellowstone holds a special place in the pantheon of America's scenic wonders. It is the country's first national park, established by an act of Congress in 1872. For decades, rumors had been circulating about a bizarre thermal basin in the Yellowstone region, where the states of Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho intersect today. Early reports claimed that even Native Americans were too terrified to live in the area, a claim that was completely erroneous. In fact, it was the Europeans who were clearly unnerved by the area's otherworldly features. Trappers and mountain men whispered reports of petrified trees with petrified birds singing petrified songs. Finally, in the years after the Civil War, the government dispatched surveying teams to explore the true nature of this enchanted landscape. When one expedition brought its photographs and sketches back to Washington, D.C., a once skeptical Congress proclaimed Yellowstone a protected park, and the philosophy of wilderness management was born. At that time, the primary goal was to protect the natural geysers from private exploitation. Yellowstone boasts 10,000 thermal features and more than half the world's geysers, a tribute to the peculiar goings-on beneath the surface of the Earth. The continental crust of our planet is normally some 15 to 30 miles thick, down to a mantle of molten rock. But in Yellowstone, the crust extends only 2 miles. The proximity of the white-hot magma heats the groundwater that courses below Yellowstone, making it bubble forth with astonishing variety. Each of Yellowstone's 200 geysers has a distinct personality. Some erupt constantly. Others lie dormant for months at a time. Old Faithful attracts the largest crowds with its noisy display. Belying its name, Old Faithful's eruptions actually occur irregularly, from every half hour to as long as 2 hours apart. The delicate formation called Minerva Terrace seems to rise out of a liquid rainbow, a pool of many colors created by algae and bacteria thriving in the warm springs, an exquisite interplay of earth, water, and heat. Thousands of years ago, that same trio of elements combined to create one of the park's most spectacular features, the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, a series of cascades in the Yellowstone River. The lower falls plummet 308 feet, almost twice the height of the falls at Niagara, into a chute that carries the water through 20 miles of volcanic rock. The myriad colors of the sheer walls, golden, orange, pink, umber, even white, were forged by high temperatures that organically altered the rock. If earth, water, and heat are the ongoing forces of change in Yellowstone, there is one other element that long ago helped to shape the land here: ice. 4 massive migrations of glaciers have passed through the park, leaving steep cliffs and sawed-off mountains, and eventually clearing the way for Yellowstone's most beloved inhabitants, its wildlife. But if the last ice age cleared the way for Yellowstone's dramatic wildlife, another natural force has proved cataclysmic: fire. In 1988, massive forest fires raced through drought-stricken Yellowstone, burning 800,000 acres, more than a third of the park. At first, the prognosis was grim. Could the animals survive the destruction of fragile habitats? Would the park's diversity be ruined forever? Although the final verdict is not in, the recovery process has been nothing short of spectacular. The natural fire-resistant qualities of the pines have resulted in quick reseeding. Ground cover is spreading rapidly, and the wildlife populations appear to be healthy and stable. Yellowstone remains a vital and ever-evolving wilderness, where the earth is young and marked with action, and those primal forces of nature, water, ice, and fire, continue to play out the eternal cycle of creation, destruction, and rebirth. It is a land where the only constant is change. But just 60 miles to the south, a contrast. Jagged, massive stone battlements appear, unchanging, ancient and permanent. This is the Teton Range. Grand Teton itself, the great sawtooth spire that gives its name to the entire range, soars 7,000 feet above the valley called Jackson Hole. It's just one peak in a sheer rampart of stone, 40 miles long and 12 to 15 miles wide. This rugged wall was built over millions of years. As the continent shifted to the west, the movement created a fracture or fault in the crust of the earth. Eventually, a series of jolting earthquakes raised the mountains along the fault lines. As the mountains hinged upwards, the crust of the earth next to them dropped down, forming Jackson Hole. Ice Age glaciers scraped and sculpted the peaks into cathedral-like crags and carved dramatic canyons below. The result? One of the continent's most spectacular displays, Grand Teton National Park. Native Americans from many surrounding regions came to hunt and fish in this valley under the shadow of the Tetons. But no tribe claimed the valley. The winters were too harsh, and game was more plentiful elsewhere. So when the first snow flurries came to the land where the Great Snake River twists down the valley, the hunting parties were already taking down their hide teepees for the season. It was in the early 1800s that French-speaking fur trappers, seeking highly profitable beaver pelts, gave the peaks the name they bear today. The trappers called the three highest peaks Les Trois Tetons, the three breasts. In that era of rough-hewn trappers, traders, and mountain men, the trails along the Snake River were walked by some of the most famous men of the frontier. One of them, David Jackson, left his name here. The mountain men referred to a mountain-encircled valley such as this as a hole, and this one, at the foot of Grand Teton, became Jackson Hole. But when fashionable men in the East exchanged top hats made of beaver pelts for hats made of silk, the mountain men took up their trap lines and moved on. Another 40 years would go by before European settlers would again leave their imprint here. After 1900, ranchers tried to settle the area. They left a lasting legacy as Jackson Hole became an outpost for ranchers, cowboys, outlaws, land wars, and all the other ingredients that to most of the world spell the American West. Other residents have a longer claim to this region. Between 7,500 and 10,000 elk winter in the National Elk Refuge. At one time, they ranged over much of the continent. Once their numbers were much greater here, until settlement took up most of their winter home. Because of ranger and park protection, today's elk are safe, as are the trumpeter swans, once on the verge of extinction. Named for their booming, trumpet-like call, there are only some 1,700 trumpeter swans in the world. This is one of the few places they inhabit, usually in pairs. Like most swans, they mate for life. Their wingspan makes them the second largest bird in North America. The soaring cliffs, the inspiring granite peaks, the bold spires of raw sculpted rock, the sheer size and massive scale of the Tetons make the delicate wonder of the flowers that adorn these alpine meadows even more dramatic. The contrasts in the West are frequently startling. Consider, for example, this sculpted landscape in eastern Utah, Arches National Park. A stone forest of gnarled and tortured pinnacles and spires, laced with a labyrinth of twisting canyons, underlaid with countless tunnels and caves. This would seem to be an enormous sanctum of secrets and mysteries. Some of the structures, like the appropriately named Delicate Arch, are so perfectly formed that they appear to have been placed here by human hand. And that's what some early explorers suspected. They likened the arches to the work of a lost civilization. Not everyone who saw this area in the days of the early American frontier was impressed. To Butch Cassidy and his outlaw gang, the Wild Bunch, the territory around Arches was simply a handy place to confuse a pursuing posse as the gang rode to its nearby hideout. As one story goes, early-day cowboys dismissed the region too. Their evaluation?
They want nothing out there. Just a lot of holes and rocks.
In fact, it's those holes in the rocks that have made this area famous. There are more than 1,500 natural stone arches within the national park, more than in any other single location on Earth. Water, ice, wind, and extreme temperatures, and the constant shifting and buckling of an underground salt bed are responsible for this gallery of sandstone sculptures. At least that's what geologists think. There are scientists who say that something like Landscape Arch cannot exist. A 306-foot ribbon of stone, just 6 feet thick at its narrowest. Put those specifications into an engineer's computer, and it will tell you that such a structure should collapse immediately. Yet Landscape Arch has held up for centuries. Despite the appearance of antiquity on a grand scale, the structures of Arches National Park do change, sometimes in a few violent seconds. That's what happened here in 1940, when a large section broke free from Skyline Arch, doubling the size of the arch's opening. Yet sudden change is rather rare in nature. Many of the most impressive natural monuments evolve so slowly that no change can be detected within a human lifetime. One great corridor of Western America is, to those who study the Earth, a gigantic time machine. This remarkable phenomenon is sometimes called the Grand Staircase. What is the staircase? A series of plateaus that descend step by step south from Utah to Arizona. Its steps record some 225 million years of geologic history. The bottom of Grand Canyon rests on rocks 1.5 billion years old, perhaps as old as life itself. A middle step is Zion Canyon. Its walls document in stone a 70 million year span of the age of reptiles. On the top step is the comparative newcomer, Bryce Canyon. Most of these rocks belong to our era, the age of mammals. Thus, this remarkable landscape is almost modern, for the major rock formation in Bryce Canyon embraces merely the last 60 million years. As a matter of fact, Bryce is not really a canyon at all. It is a dozen horseshoe-shaped amphitheaters. Each presents its own spectacle, carved by water and ice from the pink cliffs of a plateau. The people of the Paiute tribe call this place Red Rocks Standing Like Men in a Bowl-Shaped Canyon. And according to Paiute legend, these figures were once living creatures, birds, animals, lizards, that had the power to appear as humans. But they angered the powerful spirit Sinaway, who in a fury turned them into stone. The government surveyor who first mapped this region in 1876 saw it in a different way. Standing on the plateau's rim, T.C. Bailey pronounced this:
"The wildest and most wonderful scene that the eye of man ever beheld."
And from the man for whom Bryce Canyon is named came yet another judgment. Ebenezer Bryce, a Mormon rancher, ran cattle here in the 1870s. Succinctly, Bryce called the canyon
A hell of a place to lose a cow.
The same forces of water, frost, and ice that created Bryce Canyon are also slowly destroying it. The canyon rim recedes about 1 foot every 50 years. But at the same time that these stone figures are eroding and washing into the valley below, new forms are being sculpted out of the layers of vividly colored sedimentary rock. At one time, all of this was merely gravel, mud, and sand, the bed of a vast lake. But over the millennia, minerals and tremendous pressure cemented these elements together into a 2,000-foot thick layer of rock. Then colossal movements in the Earth's crust tilted it up and cracked it open, leaving the layers exposed to the eroding elements. All of this started 60 million years ago, no more than a blink in geologic time. The oldest rock in Bryce Canyon, the bottommost layer, turns up at the top of the next step down the grand staircase, Zion Canyon.
The Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it, for out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord.
Zion. To the prophets of the Old Testament, it was the holy city of God. And the early Mormon settlers saw in this place a Zion of the western wilderness. Here, nature built with an architecture that could be considered religious. For the Mormons, the formations resembled temples, cathedrals, and altars. Whether this is seen as the work of a divine architect or of the artistry of nature, the principal tool in Zion Canyon's creation is, again, water. For obvious reasons, this section of Zion Canyon is called the Narrows. A thunderstorm can, within minutes, transform these quiet waters of the Virgin River into a wall-to-wall flash flood 25 feet deep. Consequently, the Narrows are only open to visitors when the weather forecast calls for clear skies. There would be little hope for escape. The sheer walls soar 2,000 feet above the riverbed. Today it is possible to visit many parts of Zion National Park by car. One route, in fact, passes through what may be America's most scenic tunnel, with windows opening onto dazzling views of Zion Canyon. And much more of this spectacle can be seen from the trail. But there are still many far reaches of the park that have never known a human footprint, and perhaps never will. Its massive buttes, pinnacles, and mesas are chiseled from one of the most brilliantly colored rock masses on Earth. Thousands of bright and delicate formations such as these will, in the farthest ravines, evolve, crumble, and fall without ever being seen by man. Each an unrecorded chapter in the story of Zion, a story that has been unfolding since before dinosaurs ruled the earth. The oldest layer of limestone in Zion forms the top of the lowest step on the grand staircase, the step that leads to the beginnings of our continent, Grand Canyon. At a section of the canyon known as Granite Gorge, the great gouge in the earth plunges 1 mile deep and reveals some 2 billion years of our planet's past. The walls are a descending march through the ages. The shale was once ocean bottom, the sandstone once a scorching desert. Deeper than the remains of reptiles are the traces of amphibians, and below them, the fossils of the early vertebrates. And even deeper, remnants of the very first primitive forms of life. On all the earth, this is the best place to see at a glance such a microcosm of our planet's natural history. The Grand Canyon. Vast, rugged, formidable, beautiful, and in its imposing scale, unique. Gouged out of the desert of northern Arizona, the canyon twists and turns its tortured route for 277 miles. But it is not simply its great size that makes the Grand Canyon one of America's most impressive scenic wonders. It is a sprawling stage filled with constant change and breathtaking drama. The master architect of this extraordinary wonder is the Colorado River. On its 1,440-mile trek from the Rocky Mountains in northern Colorado to the Gulf of California, it courses through 19 major canyons, but none like the Grand. Like an artist, never satisfied with a masterpiece, the Colorado is incessantly reshaping and redesigning the canyon. Mud, sand, and gravel caught in its mighty torrents scour the canyon walls. Miniature chisels that sculpt the canyon even further. Today, there are two main trails into the canyon, the Kaibab and Bright Angel. In 1928, a suspension bridge between the north and south rims was built at the foot of the Kaibab. Since animals couldn't make the treacherous journey down the cliffsides, some 50 men, mostly Navajo and Havasupai, hoisted the 2,000-pound suspension cables onto their backs and hauled them 7 miles down to the river's edge. Annually, thousands of tourists traverse the switchbacks while perched on the canyon's famous mules. Those who make the 6,000-foot descent into the canyon from the North Rim pass through 4 different climate life zones. The extremes in temperature are comparable to traveling the 3,000 miles from the forests of British Columbia to the deserts of Sonora, Mexico. Each section displays its own distinct animal and plant life, from a scorpion scurrying in the searing heat on the canyon's floor to the majestic rock-climbing bighorn sheep. It was in 1869 that the first documented expedition conquered the Colorado through the treacherous Grand Canyon. The leader of that crew of adventurers was a persistent, one-armed Civil War veteran, John Wesley Powell. His journal of the trip brought this natural spectacle to the attention of the world. The canyon has been described 1,000 times since, but never more fittingly than by Powell himself.
The glories and the beauties of form, color, and sound unite in the Grand Canyon. Forms unrivaled even by the mountains, colors that vie with sunsets, and sounds that span the diapason from tempest to tinkling raindrop, from cataract to bubbling fountain.
If one place alone had to be selected to symbolize the challenging scale, the great sweep of time, the rugged natural beauty of the American West, surely the Grand Canyon would be it. In these places, today held in trust as a part of our national heritage, we can discover the links between our past and present, and our connection to all living things.